Hello, everyone. The title of this chapter is Pre-Classical and Classical Theories of Crime. This is the first chapter where we begin to discuss theories. Pre-classical and classical theories of crime hold certain assumptions, and you'll notice that at the beginning of every theoretical paradigm that we explore in this class, we will go over assumptions. Most theories or explanations of crime are built on assumptions about either individual behavior or assumptions about how society is structured. Well, your pre-classical and classical theories of crime all assume that people are hedonistic. And the term hedonistic means that people seek pleasure above everything. These theories also assume that individuals are rational, and they assume that individuals weigh the costs and benefits of their actions prior to committing them. With this in mind, prior to classical theories' emergence, individuals in the pre-classical area believed that when a person committed a crime or engaged in criminal behavior, it was due to supernatural phenomena. In other words, they believed that people who committed crimes only committed crimes because they had spiritual deficits. So, if you recall from the Bible, there were instances where people who committed crimes were actually being possessed by demons and evil spirits. So, most primitive cultures, as well as the Catholic Church, Islamic court systems, and other earlier civilizations, bought into this idea that people who committed crimes were people who had spiritual deficits and were spiritually weak. And the way that people responded to this deficit or perceived deficit was to punish individuals using corporal punishment or other types of very cruel punishments. And you should read about these in your textbook. The other thing, in addition to corporal punishment for individuals who were presumed to be spiritually immoral, was to punish people publicly. And so, if you've ever seen movies from the early 18th and 17th centuries, you'll see that when individuals committed crimes, they were often punished in front of their entire village or town. And they were punished very cruelly, either from things like being beheaded, decapitated, boiled alive, or other inhumane and cruel types of punishment. However, Thomas Hobbes wrote a book in 1651 called Leviathan, and this book argued that the cause of crime wasn't necessarily due to spiritual deficits. He argued that human beings are rational, meaning that human beings will oftentimes engage in certain behaviors because they believe that those behaviors or the benefit of those behaviors outweigh the cost of any type of punishment. And so, because of that, he argued that society is set up in such a way that individuals will always create some type of common authority or government out of fear, and that these governments are designed to protect the individual freedoms and liberties of other individuals against those who would decide to take advantage of others. He also argued that individuals must democratically create rules that all citizens should follow, and rule and lawbreakers should face punishment by the government that is created by the people to protect the freedoms and liberties of the people. Borrowing on these ideas, Beccaria came along and he was dubbed the father of classical school and the father of the deterrence theory. He wrote a book entitled On Crimes and Punishments in 1764 at the age of 26, and he was a student of the law. So you can imagine that he had lots of ideas about how the legal system should be reformed in order to meet these ideas that had been forwarded by John Hobbes. So Beccaria waged and led a reform movement for the purposes of ridding the justice system of arbitrary judges, because prior to this time, judges could just decide that a person was guilty of the crime that they had been accused of without necessarily having any proof. So Beccaria also added that not only should the system be rid of arbitrary judges, but legal bodies should be created to define crimes as well as the punishments of those crimes so that those punishments didn't necessarily exceed the harm done by the crimes committed. In addition, many other elements and features of the current legal system that we have came out of this movement. So, for example, no secret accusation, which means that if a person is accused of committing a crime, that person should be able to confront those who have accused them and be able to cross examine not only the accusers, but also anyone who stands up as a witness to the crime. And then, lastly, and very much importantly, Beccaria argued that torture should not be used against defendants. Defendants should be tried by a group of their peers rather than judges, and that the justice system should be far more transparent and public so that it could be better understood by individuals, so that if they think about committing a crime, they would understand the justice system, they would understand the possible penalties of committing a crime, and then make the rational decision to refrain from committing crimes. And so it's this feature, the feature of education, that Beccaria argued is the surest way to prevent crime. If we educate people on the cost of crime, then people will make the rational decision to refrain from crime. Beccaria was also against the use of the death penalty. He believed that the death penalty was far too harsh, and that oftentimes when the death penalty was instituted for individuals who commit crime, it had the undesirable effect of actually encouraging people to commit crimes. And so Beccaria, in short, argued that the way to deter people from committing crimes is to actually manipulate the characteristics of punishment. If punishment is swift, certain, and severe, Beccaria argued, then that punishment would be more likely to deter offenders from committing crime. Let's go through these three elements that Beccaria argued would be influential in deterring individuals from committing crimes. The first is swiftness. Swiftness refers to the length of time between an individual committing a crime and the time that the individual is punished. Beccaria argued that if a person is punished shortly after they commit a crime, they would be more likely to make the connection between their actions and the punishment. So oftentimes, if you ever see that a person, whenever a person house trains a dog or a puppy, what they tell you to do is after that dog uses the restroom in the house, that you should immediately punish the dog by doing something like tapping them on their nose with a piece of newspaper. And the reason why they say that you should do this immediately is because if too much time elapses between the time that the dog uses the restroom in the house and the time that you tap the dog on the nose, the dog won't be able to understand why they're being tapped on the nose. Well, Beccaria argued that human beings are oftentimes similar to that, and that they need to be punished shortly after the commission of a crime. The other element of punishment that Beccaria argued was important was certainty, and he argued that this was the most important quality of punishment. What this means is that a person has the likelihood that a person will be punished has to be high or perceived as high in order for that punishment to be effective. If an individual perceives that they won't be punished or that the likelihood of being punished is low, then they'll be less likely to be deterred from that punishment. And then finally, the last characteristic of punishment that Beccaria argued was important was severity. Punishments must outweigh the benefit of the crime. Punishment must be severe enough so that whatever rewards or benefits come from committing crime aren't viewed as being worth the risk of punishment. However, not only should punishment outweigh the benefit of crime, but you cannot go too far in punishment. Punishment should not be so severe, because if punishment is too severe, then it will actually have the opposite effect of leading to crime. Some examples of this would be the three strikes law, death penalty, as well as scared straight programs and mandatory minimum sentencing. All of these are severe punishments that are meant to deter individuals from committing crime. Now, I've used the term deterrence several times, and there are two types of deterrence. The first type of deterrence is specific deterrence. And when we aim to focus on specific deterrence, what we're really doing is punishing the specific individual who has already committed crimes in hopes that that person will be deterred from committing further criminal behavior. So, for example, arresting a person or incarcerating a person, those are all forms of punishment that aim to deter known criminal offenders. But then there's also what's called general deterrence, which is punishment that focuses on stopping would-be offenders from engaging in criminal behavior. So this is the type of punishments that are designed for the purpose of deterring the general public from committing crimes. So, for example, when we see an individual who commits a severe crime or a harsh crime, and we see that person get the death penalty, then the death penalty is designed for the purpose of deterring the general public from engaging in similar crimes. Beccaria's ideas were very influential in the current criminal justice system that we have today. We have his ideas to thank for the public nature of the U.S. justice system. We also have his ideas to thank for the emphasis on deterrence, as well as all of the due process and individual rights that we have in our society today that are documented in the Bill of Rights. We also have Beccaria to thank for cross-examinations, the right to a speedy trial, and the right to be informed of decisions of justice. However, a second person is extremely important in this regard as well, and his name is Jeremy Bentham. Jeremy Bentham created what is called the hedonistic calculus, which argues that human beings are naturally hedonistic and that they constantly will weigh pleasure versus pain. And human beings will frequently try to do those things that they believe will maximize pleasure while minimizing pain. Bentham was influential in popularizing classical thinking in Britain, and he was also influential in creating what is called the panopticon, which is that eight-sided prism that was first created and made popular in Europe and early Pennsylvania penitentiaries. This perspective has several important policy implications, and I mentioned some of them. The most vile one is what's called the death penalty, which is used as a deterrent. And then we also have increasing police officers, which is another policy implication, because the more police officers you have, then certainly what we would hope to see was that people would perceive that the likelihood of being punished would be higher. And then lastly, programs such as Scared Straight are also designed for the purpose of influencing and shaping offenders' perceptions of punishment. So these are the important topics that came out of this chapter that I wanted to review with you all. Thank you, and please read this chapter.